Now we've talked about artificial sweeteners, natural sweeteners, and alternative sugars. Now, do these items really help to lose weight and improve insulin and glucose? Now, number 10 is allulose. You may have heard it's a game changer. Hi friends! Looking for the healthiest sweetener to replace sugar? Let's take a deep dive into the 10 most popular sweeteners on the market and talk about how they really affect your health, your blood sugars, and in the end, I'm going to talk about a rising star allulose and give you my choice on the best sweetener to use. Now, number 1 is stevia, derived from the leaves of the Stevia rhambodiana plant. This is a high-intensity sweetener that has 0 calories and is 400 times sweeter than sugar. Now, if you've ever baked with it, then you may have discovered that the food was harder to bite, bitter, and had a strong aftertaste. Don't try to use it to ferment or pickle foods either. It won't produce the right fermentation products that one desires when you're pickling or fermenting foods. Supposedly, stevia doesn't raise your blood sugar. That's what they say, but I'm going to show you some surprising effects on your blood sugars a little later. Now, you can buy stevia as a whole leaf powder, which is less sweet, or buy it as an extract in powder form or liquid form. 1/8 of a teaspoon of stevia extract is equivalent to 1 tablespoon of stevia leaf, which is equivalent to half a cup of sugar in sweetness. However, the whole leaf has not been approved by the FDA for its use in food. Now, I've tried stevia, and it has an aftertaste that's described as bitter. The sweetness is due to 3 compounds: ribania, ribondioside D, and stevioside. Now, ribondioside has a less bitter and less metallic taste than the others. Now, there is another compound called ribondioside M that supposedly has no aftertaste and is sold as NutraSweet M or Stevio Reb M. These stevioglycosides are not absorbed in your upper intestinal tract and pass in your colon unchanged until your gut microbiome metabolizes it into steviol. Steviol is absorbed into your bloodstream from your colon, and then it gets metabolized in your liver, and then it gets urinated out. Normal consumption is non-toxic to the liver and kidneys. Stevia leaves have been dried and used to sweeten teas and medicines in South America for over 200 years. Actually, sugarcane has been around since 8000 BC in New Guinea and started spreading around the globe since 5th century AD when an Indian scientist, he figured out how to store and transport crystallized sugar. Now, people didn't start suspecting that maybe there is a connection between sugar, obesity, and type 2 diabetes until in the 19th century, which is almost 2,000 years later. And scientists, they weren't popular when they were talking about sugar and health consequences until the modern century. The thing is, just because you have purified an ingredient from a natural plant does not mean that that ingredient is good for your body. Cyanide is all natural. I'm sure you would agree that it's not so good for the body. It can be purified from the seeds of apples and the pits of fruits like apricots and cherries. And we'll talk about that a little later. Stevia won't directly raise blood sugars, and the key word is directly. And that's popular with people who have diabetes or on a ketogenic diet. Apparently, it is stable for up to 392 degrees Fahrenheit, so you can't use it with high heat like grilling. Now, number 2 is aspartame, which is found in many diet sodas and low-calorie foods. It is not 0 calories. It actually has the same calories as pure sugar, but it is about 200 times sweeter than sugar, so you basically use less of it. It's not heat stable. It's been on the market since the 1980s as safe to consume if you limit it to 50 milligrams per kilograms of body weight daily. So for a person weighing about 150 pounds, you can consume 19 cans of Diet Coke and chew 270 pieces of Trident sugar-free gums a day, and that would be considered safe. That's a great way to erode your enamel and to get TMJ pain. Aspartate is actually a dipeptide, 2 amino acids linked together, aspartic acid and phenylalanine as methyl esters. Now, when you eat it, aspartame breaks down into 3 pieces: aspartic acid, phenylalanine, and methanol. Methanol metabolizes into formaldehyde. Have you ever smelled formaldehyde? Formaldehyde is a known human carcinogen and is literally an embalming agent. Do you remember in 2020, there was a run on PPE and hand sanitizer? Well, some shady companies introduced hand sanitizers that should have had ethanol. This one has ethyl alcohol, or it has isopropyl alcohol. But instead, they put methanol, which caused thousands of deaths all over the world, including a few people here in the United States because they drank it. Methanol and formaldehyde are highly toxic with high mortality and morbidity, and it can cause blindness, heart and brain damage when ingested. Inhalation and absorption through the skin has little toxicity, but methanol is rapidly absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract in less than 10 minutes and reaches a peak in plasma concentration in 30 minutes to an hour. For some reason, people falsely believe to their detriment that drinking methanol and other alcohols could prevent viral infections. It cannot. No amount of alcohol is safe, even when you drink wine and beer. The higher the dose, the faster the poison. Now, phenylalanine is a normal amino acid that your body needs, but high doses can be detrimental for people with phenylketonuria, or PKU, who cannot metabolize phenylalanine. Accumulation of this amino acid causes permanent brain damage. Now, people generally look for sugar substitutes to lose weight and control their blood sugars, but aspartame has been shown to increase body fat, increase weight gain, and obesity when consumed in large amounts, which is equivalent to drinking half a can of Diet Coke every day. Now, if you regularly drink at least half a can of Diet Coke daily, you will have more visceral fat than those who consume little aspartame over several years. Aspartame has been linked to tinnitus, hearing loss, migraines, and movement disorders. Now, I wonder if any of these people were tested for elevated levels of phenylalanine. Now, if this isn't enough, there are reports of aspartame increasing bladder pain. This is very common. I see this all the time, as many people think they have an infectious disease, but they actually don't have a bladder infection because all their urinary tests are normal. It is not unexpected that aspartame should kill some of your microbes in your gut and cause inflammation in your gut, possibly contributing to inflammatory bowel disease. So far, I have trouble understanding why we still allow companies to put aspartame in our food. And believe it or not, there are over 6,000 food products with aspartame. The last nail in the coffin for my consumption of aspartame was when the World Health Organization in 2023 declared aspartame to be a possible carcinogen to humans. But true to capitalism, our U.S. government wants definitive proof before this ingredient, which offers no nutritional health value, to stay on the market. Now, the only way it will get off the market is if you and I stop buying products that add aspartame, which is basically processed foods. I won't even let my kids buy gum with aspartame, and will give them an earful if they still want it. Now, number 3 is sucralose, or Splenda, which is a modified form of sugar, the poster child of artificial sweeteners. It supposedly has 0 calories too, and is 600 times sweeter than sugar. It's considered to be an environmental contaminant. And you know how people don't like genetically modified foods? Technically, sucralose isn't a food, nor is it a gene. It's literally a lab creation, a Frankenstein molecule that can modify your genes, your DNA. It's a chemically modified ingredient that is a modifier of animal and human genes. Now, I would rather eat a genetically modified whole plant than to eat a chemical that can genetically modify me. Sucralose 6 acetate is an impurity in the manufacturing of sucralose and is considered to be genotoxic, pro-inflammatory, a contributor to leaky gut, and a carcinogen in animals. Now, to prove that this is a human carcinogen is super difficult. Think about tobacco and how it took decades to prove that. You basically have to feed people the toxin and see how long it takes for them to get cancer. Nobody's going to do that. It's not even ethical. And these consequences can take a long time to happen. And the only way we can speed it up is to give people more toxin. And this is why observational studies that show correlation are super helpful. And there are several observational studies across the globe correlating the rise in sucralose consumption and inflammatory bowel disease rates. Now, currently, there isn't enough human evidence, so it's still approved as a food additive in the United States and the European Union. However, in the European Union, it's not approved as a food additive for food specifically designed for children. Now, my question is, why are we eating chemicals that have no nutritional value or health benefit, and we're debating on how harmful they are? I mean, this is the hallmark of an addict when we're doing things despite the fact that it may be tremendously harmful. And governments are supporting people's addiction to sugar by allowing these chemicals that are not even supposed to be in our natural environment, let alone in our bodies, to be in our food. Sucralose is used for baking and cooking as it is heat stable, but the heat causes thermal degradation and makes sucralose react with glycerols chemically to form a toxic chemical. Glycerols are another food additive to improve the textures of baking goods, and we wonder why people are getting more cancers and more chronic metabolic diseases. Sucralose can easily dissolve in cold liquids and are found in popular drinks because it is very water soluble. It is, however, poorly absorbed by your gut, and so the majority will be excreted in your poop unless it's been metabolized by your gut microbiome. When you regularly consume sucralose, you increase Blautia cacoides bacteria by 4-fold. This bacteria is higher in people with insulin resistance. Now, those metabolites have been found in human fat tissue. So even though sucralose is a 0-calorie sweetener, that doesn't mean it won't affect your blood glucose metabolism. People with type 2 diabetes have insulin resistance, and on the surface, 0-calorie sweeteners like sucralose, they seem like it would be beneficial for them to eat to avoid those sugar spikes and avoid further exacerbating insulin resistance. Now, in fact, you get insulin resistance first before you develop type 2 diabetes. Clinical studies in humans have shown that regular consumption of sucralose made normal people without diabetes more insulin resistant. And the symptoms only come out when you eat carbohydrates with sucralose, because when you eat carbohydrates, you're giving your body a carbohydrate challenge, glucose. That means if you're baking cookies with sucralose thinking you will improve your blood sugars, that is not what the data shows. In fact, people have the opposite effect and get higher blood sugars. Now, this is counterintuitive to an ingredient that has 0 calories and is poorly absorbed. And this is because when you eat, you never just eat for yourself. You are feeding your gut microbiome. You are changing them. There are trillions of gut microbes that are metabolic workhorses for your body. Now, these microbes, they can make anti-inflammatory and pro-inflammatory molecules that can immediately affect your health. Each species produces different metabolites, and they digest different ingredients in whatever you eat, be it nutritious or toxic. So when you ignore your gut microbiome in your food choices, then you are ignoring the most powerful immune and metabolic organ that can improve or destroy your health. And this change occurs with just one meal, just one bar, because bacteria can clone itself every 15 minutes. So when you eat sucralose, you can't metabolize it or absorb it, but your gut microbiome can. And these gut microbes affect how well you metabolize glucose. Number 4 is saccharin, or sweetener, which is one of the oldest artificial sweeteners. Here's the chemical name. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. It too has 0 calories because it's not supposed to be in food, but it tastes sweet, 200 to 700 times sweeter than sugar. Not surprisingly, it has an aftertaste because it's a chemical from tar. Saccharin was discovered by accident in 1879 by a lab in Johns Hopkins who was experimenting with a coal tar derivative, benzoic sulfamide, and then he noticed a sweet taste on his hand. A year later, he contracted to Germany to manufacture it to sell in America. But many people were against his food additive, including the head chemist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. However, they serve at the pleasure of the U.S. president. And at that time, it was President Theodore Roosevelt who said, literally, anyone who says saccharin is injurious to health is an idiot. And so he fired him. Now, Roosevelt suddenly died at 61 in his sleep and suffered from massive inflammation for about 3 months before his death. Now, the guy he fired, Dr. Harvey Washington Wiley, was a chemist and a physician. He died at 86 years of age. You may know some of his work. The Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval, which was created for you and I to be able to tell which products were the safest to buy. Dr. Wiley was a pioneer advocating against food adulteration for the public. This is just another example of how politics silences good scientists, physicians, and we, the public, suffer the consequences. Now, saccharin has been shown to cause bladder cancer in rats, so it was listed in 1982 as a possible human carcinogen. But in 2000, it was taken off the list as a mechanism in which it caused cancer in rats. It doesn't happen in humans. It has, though, been linked to painful bladder syndrome or interstitial cystitis. Now, number 5 is erythritol, which is a natural sugar alcohol that your body makes from glucose. So at any given time, you will have some erythritol in small amounts from the glucose that your body makes on its own. Now, depending on your insulin resistance, you may make more or less. Now, this study added a tracer to glucose given to human blood cells and measured the amount of erythritol after 120 minutes or 2 hours. So the higher your blood sugars, the more erythritol your body can make. And all human cells can make erythritol from glucose. So when you get more insulin resistance, you then have higher blood sugars for longer duration, which makes more erythritol. Now, when you went to college, were you a freshman 15? Did you gain 15 pounds living in the dorms as a freshman? When you gain that kind of weight, it will go directly to your abdomen as central adiposity or belly fat. That belly fat is insulin resistant. So even 18-year-old college students make more erythritol when they pack on belly fat. But college students aren't generally at high risk of dying from heart disease unless that college student gains more and more abdominal fat, ultimately transforming over decades from insulin resistance to full-blown type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, and atherosclerosis. This is syndrome X. People with syndrome X have a very active pentophosphate pathway, so they make more erythritol on their own. And we're going to get back to this a little later. Erythritol is also commonly found in whole foods and fermented foods and sold purified as a low-calorie sweetener. Now, whenever you eat fruits like melons, my favorite, watermelon, pears, and grapes, you are eating erythritol. I eat these things all the time. Sake has 70 times more erythritol than watermelon. Miso paste has 60 times more erythritol, and soy sauce has 40 times more. It is estimated that people just normally consume about a gram of erythritol daily through their food. After you eat erythritol, about 90 to 95% is absorbed in your small intestine. And after that, it's really excreted unchanged in your urine. The other 5 to 10%, it gets oxidized into erythrose and then into erythronate. It is also sold as purified erythritol, which tastes only about 60 to 70% as sweet as sugar. But it is only 5% of the calories per gram of sugar, and it doesn't raise your blood sugar or insulin levels. It makes high-intensity sweeteners like stevia and aspartame actually taste better, so you'll find it together. It also has fewer gastrointestinal problems because it doesn't draw water to the gut, and so little of it actually goes down. But it actually adds texture to your food because it adds bulk to processed foods. But everything has a limit. High doses of erythritol, about 4 tablespoons, which is at least 51 grams, can cause nausea, stomach rumbling, bloating, and diarrhea. If you're eating that much at one time, there's a problem. However, some people can have just problems with 1 tablespoon, about 13 grams, which is about the same amount as in this drink. Now, have you seen the recent headlines on erythritol where people who had higher blood erythritol had higher cardiovascular events? Now, this is a legitimate journal, and this study was conducted by a major U.S. medical center, the Cleveland Clinic. However, this paper did not change my opinion on erythritol because it is not examining erythritol intake. Remember how I mentioned your body naturally makes erythritol. So even if you don't eat any healthy whole foods with erythritol, like fruits, watermelon, peaches, apricots, mushrooms, even if you're not eating added erythritol, if you checked your blood right now, you would still have measurable amounts of erythritol, especially if you have insulin resistance and you're eating carbohydrates, even normal sugar. This is because your body can convert your blood sugar into erythritol by itself. I'm sure you already know that insulin resistance leads to a whole host of chronic diseases. Specifically for this paper, their study population had a whole host of chronic diseases. Over 60% of the participants in this paper had heart failure. A fifth of them had diabetes. Over 40% already had a prior heart attack, and over 70% had documented coronary artery disease and documented high blood pressure. Now, never mind the non-nutritive sweetener. Anyone with these problems is at high risk of having a cardiovascular event, including blood clots, independent of erythritol consumption. Now, I was wondering, why would the body make more erythritol? Well, this is where the pentose phosphate pathway comes in. And people who have chronic metabolic diseases have a more active pentophosphate pathway. Now, this pathway is an alternative branch of glycolysis that produces two powerful antioxidants, NADPH. It just produces it twice. So you make two NADPHs every time you go through this pathway. It also makes the sugars needed to make DNA and RNA. The pentose phosphate pathway is special because no energy in the form of ATP is produced or used. However, NADPH is another type of cellular energy currency, and it's also an antioxidant. People with chronic metabolic diseases have more oxidative stress, so they need more antioxidants. They also have a whole host of proteins that are like going berserk, so they have more active RNA generating inflammatory cytokines, which are proteins. And so it makes sense that the body wants to make more antioxidants, and these people have a greater need of RNA, and therefore they have a more active pentophosphate pathway, which occurs inside the cellular cytoplasm, or the watery part of the cell, bathing all your organelles. There are actually two parts to the pentophosphate pathway, the oxidative phase and the reversible non-oxidative phase. The oxidative phase makes the two NADPH antioxidant molecules and ribulose 5-phosphate, the sugar that makes your DNA and RNA. So DNA literally makes genes, and RNA is the translator for your genes, which create proteins like cytokines. The neat thing about ribulose 5-phosphate is that the sugar is versatile and can do whatever your body needs. Make DNA, make RNA, or go back to glycolysis and make ATP. I eat plenty of exogenous erythritol-rich foods that have been shown to improve insulin resistance, belly fat, syndrome X, atherosclerosis, and inflammation. And I intend to still eat them because longevity cultures have eaten these same whole foods for thousands of years. But if you're eating a modern cookie made out of erythritol, I think that the erythritol is the least of your problems. Now, number 6 is monk fruit extract, lo hanguo, which comes from a natural fruit, monk fruit. It has 0 calories, but is 100 to 250 times sweeter than sugar. Now, the natural fruit actually has fructose and glucose, but the extract does not. Now, it tastes sweet due to a molecule called mogroside, specifically mogroside V. Many monk fruit extracts are combined with erythritol. In fact, some of them are almost all erythritol, and you won't know unless you check your label. Different companies have different ratios of ingredients, so they may all taste different because their extracts have different ratios. Now, number 7 is xylitol, which is also a natural sugar alcohol found in many fruits and vegetables, but it is first discovered in beechwood chips in 1890. It is almost the same sweetness as sugar, but has 40% fewer calories than sugar, but it still increases insulin and blood glucose. Now, 25 to 50% of the xylitol you eat is absorbed in your intestines, and less than 2 grams is excreted in the urine unchanged. The remaining 50 to 75% is fermented by your gut microbiome into short-chain organic acids and gases that will make you fart, and it promotes gut motility to have a laxative effect. Increased xylitol consumption can put some people at risk for kidney stones, as it can increase oxalate, calcium, and phosphate urinary excretion. Now, since most of it ends up in the gut, it isn't so well tolerated and can cause bloating and diarrhea. If you're a dog owner, you should know xylitol is highly fatal to dogs because it induces insulin release, causing severe hypoglycemia within 30 minutes of ingestion, and can cause liver failure and coagulopathies. In other words, keep those sugar-free gums and products away from your dogs. Now, number 8 is agave nectar. It is about 80% sweeter than sugar, and it has a lower glycemic index because it is made from high amounts of fructose, 80%, and the other 20% is sucrose. Per spoonful, it has more calories than sugar because it is dense, high fructose syrup. The marketing of this product is genius. We have villainized high fructose corn syrup, but even I was willing to eat high fructose agave syrup until I realized I was eating fructose. Fructose tastes sweeter than glucose. Agave syrup is 1.8 times sweeter than table sugar. Have you wondered why fructose has a lower glycemic index? First of all, fructose is not as well absorbed as glucose. Second, when we measure your blood sugar, we're measuring glucose, not fructose. There are several problems with fructose. Since fructose is not as easily absorbed, it can cause more bloating, gas, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. Fructose increases uric acid levels, which exacerbate gout. It contributes to weight gain and obesity by driving hunger. Fructose contributes to metabolic diseases by increasing blood pressure, elevating triglycerides, and insulin resistance by causing the accumulation of fat in the liver, resulting in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Now, if you aren't a fan of high fructose corn syrup, then agave is not for you. Number 9 is honey, an ancient syrup processed by bees. Now, most of this honey is fructose, then it's glucose, and thus honey tastes 25% sweeter than sugar. Now, I know there are plenty of health claims about honey, including relieving constipation. And I think I explained why that could happen prior, right? It's because it's high in fructose, which is poorly absorbed and can promote a laxative effect. There are much better ways to relieve constipation. Try some prunes. Now, if you have allergies, there really is no sound evidence eating local honey helps. You may have used it to soothe your sore throat, but unfortunately, it doesn't improve the overall symptom frequency or severity of common colds. Now, I do like Manuka honey for wound care, especially because honey has natural antimicrobial properties. Now, a few years ago, we visited a local park that was giving a show and tell about bees and honey, and the tour guide said, honey never expires. Now, what does that really mean? When I think of expiration, I think of spoilage and infectious diseases. And it is well known that honey contains botulism toxin, basically little bacteria spores that can cause paralysis in infants. So children under 1 should never eat any forms of honey. Now, number 10 is allulose. You may have heard it's a game changer. It is a monosaccharide sugar that is found naturally in wheat and some fruits, but commercially made from corn, which, by the way, could be genetically modified. Now, it has 0.2 to 0.4 calories per gram, which is significantly smaller compared to sugar. It is 78% as sweet as sugar and appears not to increase blood sugar and insulin levels. Now, like most sweeteners, most of it gets to the large intestine, where the gut microbiome can digest them, leading to bloating and diarrhea. This takes about 2 tablespoons, or some people maybe 4 to 5 tablespoons across the whole day. Have you heard of advanced glycation end products? AGEs. That's formed when sugar reacts with amino acids under heat. This literally causes aging. That's how we can measure your hemoglobin A1C. Now, theoretically, allulose can make more AGEs. Now, we've talked about artificial sweeteners, natural sweeteners, and alternative sugars. Now, do these items really help to lose weight and improve insulin and glucose? If you're eating agave and honey, you're basically eating sugar. So no. If you're eating sugar substitutes in large amount like consuming diet drinks, just know that they are not associated with improved weight or insulin resistance. In fact, sucralose elevated glucose more, and it needed 20% more insulin to take care of the same amount of glucose. These sweeteners that reach your gut microbiome can dramatically change your gut microbiome, which then can dramatically change your metabolism of your food, and you can have exaggerated blood sugar responses in just 1 week. Now, in addition, these changes can cause chronic, life-changing leaky gut conditions, possibly even inflammatory bowel diseases. This is why for optimal health, both sugar and sugar substitutes should be minimized. And so the best sweetener would be eating whole fruit. So if you want to learn more about sweeteners made from whole fruits, watch the next video.